All right, guys. It is 11 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. And if you're just joining us, I'm just going to remind you one more time. If you'll log into nearpod.com, and once you get there, there's a little red box where you will put in the join code, which is what I'm presenting on the screen. And once I change the slide at any time, if you still need that code, it's in the top left-hand corner of the screen that I'll be presenting. So you can join the Nearpod at any time. All right. All right, well, welcome to my session. My session today is called Assessment That Counts. And hopefully you will learn something new about assessment. I'm going to be talking about pre-assessment. That's what I'm going to focus on mostly today, as well as formative and summative assessment and how that fits into the blended learning classroom. Just a little bit about me. Before we get started, I always like to introduce myself. My name is Kaylee Harmon. I am originally from Georgia, so I'm not a Texan, but I have lived here in El Paso for almost 3 years now. So, you know, it's starting to feel more and more like my home every day. I teach 3rd grade at Isleta Elementary. This is my 7th year teaching, my 2nd year in 3rd grade. And this year we departmentalized in 3rd grade. And so I teach monolingual math and science. So you'll hear me mostly talk about math and science today, but of course, this transfers over to all subject areas. All right, so since we're talking about pre-assessment today, I thought I would pre-assess you just to kind of see what you know. So I want to know one thing that you know about pre-assessment, formative assessment, or post-assessment, and how you've used them in the past in your classroom. So if you're looking, I don't know if you've used Nearpod before, but if you're looking at my screen, now would be the time to go to your Nearpod because you'll be able to write your answer there in the box. So it should have popped up on your screen, and you should be able to type your answer there in the Nearpod.
Ms. Hartman, I'm going to go ahead and start screenshotting the attendance real quick.
Okay. Okay, so as I would tell my class, you have about 1 minute left to submit your answers. And at this point, I also like to encourage participation. I have 2 classes, so I'll usually make it a little competition and say, oh, my class, you know, my first class got 94% participation. Let's see if you can get 100% participation. And that's a really good way to keep the students engaged and participating because they love a good competition. It doesn't matter if there's nothing, no reward, just knowing that they beat the other class is good enough. All right, so what I would do at this point is I would go over a few of my class's answers. And this would be for me as a teacher to see what the students know so far about a topic. And it could also be for the students so that they can see, what do I know? What do some of my peers know? Is any of that knowledge the same as what I know or different? And see kind of how that they compare. So I'm just going to share one or two of what you guys have said. V. Garcia says pre-assessment is to find out what students know. Form assessment is used to find out what they're learning. And post is what they have learned. Okay. And then I'll just share one more. Sophia says it can be informal. There must be rigor as part of the 3 forms of assessment, and they do not have to be paper pencil. Okay, very good. And that's all, those are all things that we're going to touch on today as well. Okay, so what is pre-assessment and why do we do it? I feel like most of us probably know what pre-assessment is as teachers. We know that they're the instruments or the methods that we use to determine a student's knowledge of a topic or a subject before we begin. So why do we do it? It's because our principals and our coaches tell us to, right? They say, you guys have got to pre-assess. And so we say, okay, right? No, that's not why we should pre-assess. It's not just for compliance. I'm not gonna lie. When I first started teaching and I was pre-assessing, I wasn't doing it for the right reasons. I was doing it because someone told me, you need to pre-assess this lesson, see what your kids know. Well, I was doing it, but I was kind of just doing it blindly, and I wasn't going through it and really taking the time to analyze that data. And I think the reason why is because the method I was using wasn't quite working for me. So we don't just do it to comply, we do it to allow us to determine where to begin instruction. And that's going to provide the baseline data from which to plot the students' learning progress, which is really important. We all know data is a huge part of blended learning and students taking ownership of that data. And we're going to get into that in a little bit as well. So before pre-assessing, there's a few things that I always do. So I always look at the vertical alignment to see what students should have learned in the previous grade level. And we know that we can find the vertical alignment on the TRS page. And we want to see, can the students perform this task at a mastery level? Can the students I teach 3rd grade, so I always think, can they perform the 2nd grade skill as mastered? If so, they're probably ready to move on to what I'm teaching them in 3rd grade. But if not, then I'm going to have to go back and reteach that previous grade level and get them ready and scaffolded for the 3rd grade TEK. So what I try to do is to find an activity that gives us the students a chance to show their prior knowledge and explain their thinking. So for me personally, I'm not a huge fan of the multiple choice, and I'm going to get into that in just a second. I like to find an activity that will pre-assess the student's knowledge where they can really focus on explaining their thinking. So I know all campuses may not be the same, but I really enjoy using STEM scopes. We have STEM scopes math and STEM scopes science, and I really enjoy using their pre-assessments. And I think they actually call it accessing prior knowledge. If you have that available to you and you want to look up that tab. So that's what a lot of my activities are going to show today. You can also find the teacher learning reports on Lead Forward, and I use these very often to pre-assess. And again, it's basically just like the vertical alignment. It's seeing what the students have done in second grade and what they're supposed to do in third grade. So, excuse me. So one of my focuses that you'll see later in the lesson is on multiplication and division of whole numbers. So I use this document to determine where they should have been and where they can grow to in third grade. So let's talk about a few of the methods of pre-assessment. Like I said before, you can do multiple choice or short answer, like Google Forms. So what would be some of the pros of using this method? The first thing is it's easily graded, right? They put in their answer A, B, C, D. It comes out, you get the grade. It's short and to the point, and you can easily compile the data to analyze it. You can see, okay, 10 students got the right answer, 5 got the wrong answer. Which ones were they? It's very easy to look at. The cons, especially this day and time, did the students receive help off the screen? Was someone standing behind them helping them solve that problem, especially when it relates like to math in my case? Are the students good guessers? Did they put C and they really had no idea what C was, but they got it right? So were they good guessers? And there's no opportunities for students to explain their thinking. So you don't really get to take a look inside their mind and see what process were they going through when they selected that answer choice. And it also doesn't give the students a chance to hear other students thinking, which is very beneficial to students to hear from others. So I'm going to be talking today about pre-assessing with this program that you're actually on right now, Nearpod. So I just have a quick poll just to see how familiar you are with using Nearpod, just for me to see how in-depth I should go into talking about it. So if you'll just, it's just a 30-second little poll, if you will tell me how familiar you are with using Nearpod. Okay, so it seems like we have a few pros, and most people have used it once or twice, with the occasional, with one never having used it before. All right, so I'll take that into consideration as I'm talking about Nearpod today. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about what other methods are available to pre-assess on Nearpod. So we're going to do a little exploring on what Nearpod has to offer, and I'm just going to show you some of my favorites today. I know this is kind of tiny, but hopefully you can see it on your screen a little bit better. So they have a tab called Activities whenever you're creating a Nearpod. So some of my favorite activities, which I use for pre-assessment, are the open-ended question. So that was that first question that I asked you about what you were familiar with pre-assessment. I really love to use this open-ended question because I can see, right away what students know. It's quick. I asked you one question, and I can go and see in real time what everyone is thinking at that point. I also like to use the Draw It tool. This is one of my favorites because what you can do is you can actually paste a worksheet or something behind the screen where students can work on. They can draw to it, they can type on it, and that's really beneficial so you could see students work, especially if you were showing them a math problem and you wanted to see how they were solving it. They could do that, and they could also type out their thinking as well. The Collaborate board, that's a great, really quick tool to see what your students know as a whole class. If you wanted to pre-assess something really quick, just to see as a class, what's the general consensus of the knowledge known on the subject. And then also Flipgrid, that's a really great one to get students practicing their language skills, especially for those ELs. That's a great tool. They can explain their thinking. And you could even have them do it in their native language and then in English. That way you could hear their, sometimes, you know, it's better to hear their thinking process in their native language because it comes out more clearly. But then also you do want to practice the English language as well. So the first one I'm going to kind of show you guys is the Collaborate board. So this I actually did with my class this week. We started a new unit in science about Earth's rapid changes. And so I wanted just to know what they knew, if anything, about earthquakes, volcanoes, or landslides. So this was just a quick 3-minute activity that we went through. And it allowed me to see a lot of different things. So I love it because the information I received was immediate. Right away, the answer started popping up, and it pops up with the student's name, so I can see who knows what. So what I gathered was that students, they knew a lot about volcanoes and earthquakes, but not one person mentioned anything about landslides. So as you know, as their teacher, I realized that I needed to adjust my instruction to spend more of my time talking about landslides. So where I had planned, 2 days on volcanoes, 2 days on earthquakes, 2 days on landslides, now I'm going to move more of my time to landslides because my students didn't know anything about it. Not that they showed me anyways, at least in this Collaborate board. And then I like to read them aloud to the students so that they could hear what their classmates knew, to see if any of that possibly matched with their knowledge. And it also really immediately showed me some misconceptions. I was reading through some of the little sticky notes and noticed that some students thought one thing about volcanoes that wasn't really necessarily true. So it allowed me to see those misconceptions so that I could address them in a future lesson. All right, so that was the Collaborate board. Then we have the Draw It. So I also really love this tool because it shows you in real time how the students are answering and working. And you can start to see which students are understanding or not understanding the material. So maybe if it's not on a pre-assessment, but sometimes as I see the students working on their Draw It board, I can have a mini conversation with that student and say, tell me about your thinking. Why did you start drawing this way? Or why did you start solving the problem that way? I think maybe you should go back and fix this or that. So it's really good because we can see them doing it in real time. And then if you're using it for pre-assessment, you can begin to group your students based on their needs. So I'm going to just show you a little clip. I have 2 clips for you today. So just to preface, this was a pre-assessment that I gave to my class. So I'm just showing you how I use Nearpod as a pre-assessment. And this is just me explaining the task. And then in a later clip, I'll show you some of the things the students came up with. Cassandra bought 24 cupcakes for her birthday party. 4 cupcakes can fit on each plate. She thinks she will need 6 plates. Divide these cupcakes into equal groups that show how many plates Cassandra will need. So you're going to use your drawing tool on your Nearpod, and you're going to divide these cupcakes into equal groups to show how many plates Cassandra's going to need. Okay?
So circling them?
So you're going to decide, does Cassandra need 6 plates? Why or why not? So you're going to show me equal groups, and you're going to explain in writing. So you can use the text box to explain, does she need 6 plates? So you can't just say yes or no. You need to say yes because blah, 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 or no because blah, blah, blah. Okay? All right, so work on this. I'm thinking 5-ish minutes. Okay, so I already see people have started. That's good. If you haven't started, go ahead and start now. Okay, so one thing that I think is really important, and hopefully I modeled, is to make sure that your expectations are clear when you're giving this pre-assessment, excuse me. You know, a lot of times we think, okay, pre-assessment, let me hand the kids the quiz, sit down, do it. And then they don't really know what they're working on. I remember getting that as a kid as well. You know, here's the pre-assessment on fractions, but you didn't really know what you were supposed to do or know about. So make sure your expectations are clear so that you get the most out of your students' answers. Because if you're not clear, they might not know what to do, and then your results may not be as valid. And you want to clarify. If your students have questions, you want to clarify, but don't think for the students. This is the time when you want to see what they know, and you want those valid results of the knowledge that the students are coming to you with. So don't give too much away. It's kind of like a explain and release to see what they know. All right, this next clip, this is after I gave the students some time to work on the pre-assessment, and you're going to hear from, I believe it's 3 students explaining their rationale for their answers. Who would love to share with the class your how you grouped your cupcakes and your explanation? I'll pick a few people. All right, why don't I start with Raul? And let me find your picture, Raul, and I'll put it up on the screen. Okay, so can you explain to me what you did?
So you remember when I told you that my Theo said 2 divided by, I mean not 2, 5 divided by 10 is 2?
Mm-hmm.
I figured out that 2, that you have 3 rows and it makes 3.
Okay. All right, so you just looked at the rows and you noticed that there was 3 rows. And so how many cupcakes did you have in each of your rows, Raul?
8.
Okay, so you had 8 cupcakes in each of your 3 rows. Okay, so I noticed that each one of your rows has an equal amount. All right. So you used some information that your Tia taught you. All right. Thank you for sharing, Raul. All right, who else would like to share their solution to this problem? All right, Olivia T. Let me pop yours here. All right, go ahead. Can you explain to us your solution?
So what I did is, since there's that you could only use 6 plates if you only have 6 plates, you could put them by kind of like, if you have 3 rows and if you have 2 of 3 rows, that would make 6 together, and you could just put 4 4 cupcakes in each plate.
Okay, so you put 4 cupcakes on every plate and you kind of circled around your 4 cupcakes. So did she need 6 plates?
Yes, she did.
Okay, she needed 6 plates. All right, thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else that would like to share their solution to this problem? No? All right, so let's look at it really quickly, okay? Let's take a look. If you told me, and I'm just going to use this one right here. If you told me that you needed groups of 4, because that's what it said here, 4 cupcakes on each plate, okay? So just like Lino did, he circled groups of 4, because that's how many cupcakes he knew could fit on a plate. So he did that for every set of 4 that he saw. And once he did that, he noticed that there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plates. So she thinks she will need 6 plates. Does she need 6 plates? Yes, Cassandra does need 6 plates because 24 cupcakes separated or divided into groups of 4 equals 6 total plates. Okay, so if you said another answer, what you probably did was you probably made equal groups, but with a different amount in each group. Okay, but you have to pay attention to what the problem's asking. This problem was asking for 4 in each group. Okay, so we're going to continue and explore division. All right, so that was just a little clip of my pre-assessment. So what about this did I get? I was able to see from student 1 that he understood what equal groups were, but he did not put the correct number in each group. So I would have to go back and ask him, did you read the problem carefully? Did you notice how many were supposed to be in each group? Because he did make it clear that he knew what equal meant, but not necessarily how to group them. And I was able to see that student 2 had a clear understanding of equal groups, and she was able to explain why the 6 plates were needed as well. And then something that you guys couldn't see, but I saw during the lesson was that I was able to see that one of my students, he actually changed his thinking after beginning to listen to student 2's thinking. And that's really powerful to see a student's thoughts change just from hearing another student talk. And they wouldn't get that opportunity if you just gave them the standard multiple choice type of pre-assessment. So I took this data and I used it to adjust my lessons. I knew that most of my students knew what equal groups were, but they needed help dividing objects appropriately among a set amount of groups. So I used this data to create my small groups, as well as creating a clear focus for my tutoring groups. And the ones, I also could see the ones that had got it going on. Well, a part of blended learning is once that they've got it, let them be free. Give them the opportunity to learn at their own pace. And they should be able to do this anytime, anywhere. And that gets into creating that individualized, personalized plan for each student. So you want to make sure that when you are pre-assessing, you give the students a chance to explain their thinking, whether right or wrong. I knew as soon as I clicked on that first student's submission that it was wrong. But it's okay, and it's okay for students to share wrong answers to the class. You want to hear what they think so that you can better understand what that student is coming to you with knowledge-wise. And don't let the students know right away if their thinking is not correct. If you notice, I never told that student, no, that's not right. you didn't solve it right. I listened to him and I tried to understand his thinking. I said, okay, so I see that you put them into equal groups, so I can tell what equal means. But I never told him that his answer was incorrect. Because you want them to possibly come to that conclusion themselves, especially if they listen to another student giving the correct answer. Provide meaningful feedback. Don't just say, don't just say no or yes, good job. Give them that meaningful feedback. And then once the students have shared their thoughts, then it's okay to provide an explanation and model correct thinking, which is what I did at the end. I chose one that was correct. I modeled my thinking to show them how they were technically supposed to solve that problem. And then you can segue into how it ties into your upcoming unit. Okay, so that is pretty much where I end talking about pre-assessment, and then I'm going to go into the last part of my presentation, which is on formative and summative assessment. So if there's no questions, I'll go ahead and continue on, but if you have any questions at any time, feel free to put them in the chat. All right, so we're gonna listen to this short clip from Rick Wormelli, and he talks about formative and summative assessment and why it's so important. And it really plays into the blended learning aspect here of why we have to assess formatively and periodically throughout the unit and provide that meaningful feedback to the students so that they can take ownership of their learning. So I'm going to go ahead and play.
One of the things that comes up when you get into a differentiated class, let alone one that's standards-based, is you have to begin to weigh formative versus summative assessment. Now, summative assessment is actually anticlimactic. It really refers to post-learning, after all is said and done. So it's a final declaration. Usually there's not a lot of capacity to go back and revise one's efforts and be assessed and accredited anew. But one thing that teachers forget is that something that was intended to be summative, child does poorly for whatever reason, you're allowed to make it a formative assessment. Something that was summative now becomes formative. That's actually okay. It's within your prerogative. But what about formative assessment? Well, of the two, teachers tend to spend the majority of their time designing their summative assessments, as if that was the most important aspect. But really, it's formative assessment. That's the most important aspect. It has the greatest impact on student achievement, on feedback to the teacher, everything. The whole enterprise of teaching and learning really boils down to that formative assessment. Can kids learn without grades? Yeah. Can they learn without formative assessment and the feedback that comes from it? Not at all. So we want to emphasize that. In fact, I would suggest that teachers spend at least the same amount of time, if not more, designing formative assessment instead of summative assessment. But what is this formative assessment? Well, formative assessment obviously is the ongoing assessment. It's the checkpoints along the way. But here's the kicker. The best formative assessment actually involves descriptive feedback. Not just, hey, thank you for finishing on time. No, it was you had your supplies, you were able to do this and this and this, and that helps all of us. It's kind of like Jim Fay in his Love and Logic books, Point and Describe. National Association of Secondary School Principals and many other folks who are into assessment talk about three aspects of descriptive feedback. You help the kid discover, or you point it out yourself, what was the goal, what was the original intent, the objective, where are you in relation to it, and what are we going to do to close that gap? Three different parts of good descriptive feedback. When a kid can take that and use it, we find that formative assessment is any assessment that's done where the kid is allowed to revise his efforts in light of that feedback and then be assessed and accredited anew. Perhaps there's some relearning in there as well, but it's ongoing, and that's the focus. If our focus is summative assessment, students don't learn as well. Dylan William, one of the great researchers in this, he did this wonderful manifesto, Inside the Black Box, with Paul Black. And man, it turned America on its ear. In 1998, we started looking at formative assessment and started transforming schools. So how do we give feedback to kids? Is there formative assessment in my lesson plans? In great lessons, I should be able to circle the formal formative assessment and feedback going to students. There's also informal, where you observe, maybe get some feedback right there in the spur of the moment. But I should see lots of checks for understanding and kids getting that feedback. In fact, Bob Marzano and many others talk about the effect size, the impact of some decision. And it turns out the effect is much greater if you do an assessment and there's going to be descriptive feedback. If there's no feedback, it turns out the assessment, the tasks, the assignments don't have much instructional value compared to when there's feedback. So in the same planning breath, as I design my assessment, I'm going to design how will students get feedback on this and how will it inform my lessons. In fact, I should be able to walk down a hallway and stop a teacher cold. They don't know I'm coming. They don't know the question's coming. And say, how did formative assessment inform one of your decisions today or this week with a student, a subset of students, or a class? And the teacher should feel very comfortable. I found out this about these students. I decided to do that. That's one of the big pillars of differentiated instruction. And it turns out classrooms where teachers focus on formative assessment, test scores go up if you use that as an indicator. But really, mastery, student achievement, it all goes up. And again, I wonder, what goes unlearned because a teacher didn't get into, didn't understand, didn't apply formative assessment principles?
All right, so we can see how important formative assessment really is in the blended learning classroom. So it's probably the most meaningful type of assessment for students, just like Rick said in the last video. What it does is it allows our data sources to be regularly and consistently refreshed. We call it living data, right? Because it's constantly changing as the students are constantly learning, and it's updated to reflect the most current information about the students. So they need access. That's a big thing in blended learning, is that students need access to their data, right? And so they need to be able to tell you what they know, what they maybe are lacking, and how they're going to build that gap, bridge the gap. So it's really important as a teacher as well that when you give instructions or introduce an activity, that you provide a rationale for your decision when using the evidence for the data. So I could even say, oh, you know what? Hey, today we're going to learn and continue learning about composing and decomposing fractions, because on yesterday's exit ticket, I noticed that we had a really hard time composing with unit fractions. So providing that rationale for why we're learning something. And the students also have to be able to articulate why they are working on their current task, because in the blended learning classroom, all students should not be at the same pace or on the same level. You'll have some above, you'll have some below, you'll have some average, but either way, they need to be able to explain to you or anyone walking into the classroom why they are working on that topic based upon their data. So bringing it back to Nearpod, like I said, I use Nearpod every day. So these are just some of the formative assessments that I have found useful in my classroom. This one, Time to Climb, that's one of the students' favorites. It's like a game, and it is multiple choice, so it doesn't give students the chance to explain, but they really enjoy it because it is fun, and it would be great for a quick check to see what your students know. That's kind of the same thing as quiz. It's multiple choice, and it could be more of just a quick check for you rather than the students getting the chance to explain their thinking. The open-ended question is really great for students to explain their thought. I use it a lot as exit tickets. Since we're not in the physical classroom anymore, they can't hand you something as they walk out the door, but this is what I use. I pose a question, they answer, and I could give them immediate feedback that day, or I can give them feedback the next day when we meet in small group about their answer. And again, that's a really good one because students are given the chance to explain and not just select a B, C, or D answer. Same thing with Flipgrid. Again, it gives the students a great opportunity to explain verbally. Maybe if writing isn't their forte and they are really great at expressing themselves with words, maybe Flipgrid is the right assessment for them. And that's another thing. You want to be able to cater to your students and let them choose how they are assessed, especially if it's formatively. Give them options. That's another big thing in blended learning, is that your students have choice and they are able to take control of their learning. All right, and then just moving on, ending the presentation with post-assessment. I like to keep it short and sweet while covering all that needs to be covered. I say about 10 to 15 questions because if it gets past that point, the students already feel defeated from the start. I know my kids, the first question they ask is, "Miss, how many questions is it?" And usually if I say it's over 10, you hear like the groans and the grunts, and then they're already feeling like they don't want to do it. And that can negatively impact your results as well. You can include multiple choice and some short answer or explain questions. Again, I always like to stress those explain questions where you can see what the students are thinking. Get them to model their thinking. I always like to align with the TEKS and check the frequency distribution chart if you're in a testing grade level. So that's a really great resource so that you can see which SEs or which topics are widely tested on the STAR test. That way you can spend most of your time focusing on those highly tested questions. And I also look at lead forward test release questions. That way I can see the verbiage that the STAR test uses and start using that same wording with my students and getting them prepared to see questions asked in those particular ways. So that's a really good resource as well. And then, of course, we allow our students to have this summative data to inform our future small groups and tutoring sessions, and we allow them to have access. Again, we don't just hand them the test and say, okay, you made a 70, that's average, pretty good job. Well, what 3 questions did they miss? What can they build upon? What areas do they need to strengthen? There's always room for improvement. And students need to be able to see that and take ownership as well. And then a really big thing is that students should celebrate their achievements and milestones. We want to celebrate that. If a student tested the first time and got a 40 and tested the second time and got a 60, well, they built their score up by 20 points. A lot of times they'll say, Miss, but I failed this. No, well, you grew 20 points from the first time. Let's see what we can do to make you grow 20 more points. And just keep building that student up. And when they see their data on the data wall, I know when we were in the classroom, we had little stickers that they would put on the wall to monitor their data. When they see that and their stickers changing maybe from red where they failed a SE to green because now they've passed it, they instantly light up and they want to continue working and striving to become better. So I want to see what you guys have learned so far. So I want you guys to tell me what is one thing that you learned about assessment that you feel like you can implement in your own classroom that you maybe do not already do. So what is something that you could implement in your classroom that you do not already do? I'll give about a minute to 2 minutes for you to put your response down.
Thank you, Ms. Harmon. Just get a heads up, we're at a 5-minute point.
All right, perfect. All right, so let's see. I think let's see. Some of you will try the time to climb feature, the drawing on Nearpod. That's probably my favorite one. Flipgrid to use for students to explain their answer. Well, I like this one. They said, I've been using Nearpod, but have not used it as a pre-assessment. So that's a good thing to try, definitely. Using Nearpod in a variety of ways to make it more engaging and not so much a test. Yes, a lot of times my students don't even know I'm pre-assessing them. I'm pretty sure all the time they don't, especially when I use the time to climb or anything like that. They just think it's a game. Giving more open-ended assessments so students can discuss their thinking. Not correcting students immediately. That's a good one. And that's something that takes time because you want to just be like, no, don't think that way. This is the right way. But giving them time to correct themselves, yes. I have not used time to climb. I'm decided to try it out. Nearpod to use all the different forms of assessments they have. They are quick. That's what I love, that they're quick and you can see that feedback immediately. The discussions are so powerful. Yeah, they really are. They're definitely powerful for the students. Trying Nearpod to assess. The varied ways students can demonstrate their learning and understanding. Pre-assessment, making sure you can use open-ended questions so that you can see the students thinking and allowing them to explain. All right, awesome. Well, that really concludes my presentation today, and I hope that you guys were able to take something away from this and use it in your own classroom, and I can see from your answers that I think you guys probably will do that. If you guys don't have any questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes if you have questions, but if not, I want to thank you for coming to my presentation today on assessment that counts. And have a great rest of your weekend.
Miss Harmon, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you kind of just give me an idea of what does it look like when you are conferencing with your students? Like, how long does that take you to do when you do conference with them using the Nearpod, and just kind of that little piece? Are you small grouping them and then conferencing with them and then kind of touching on that and then going based on what the conference was like, into instruction that way, or how does that look for you in your classroom?
Yeah. So it kind of depends, but usually I will do it in my small group. I'll kind of bring my small group together And, especially if it's like an exit ticket and the answers were all kind of similar, I'll go over it that way in conference with the students. And sometimes I'll do one-to-one, especially if I can see that the student really does not have a clear understanding of the topic that we either, I pre-assessed or formatively assessed. I'll kind of do a one-to-one, just a quick check, kind of also to see if they can maybe explain their thinking again. Because, if they wrote it, maybe writing wasn't their best way that they knew to explain that. So maybe I want to give them a chance to verbally explain it and see if they can do better that way. And then I use that information that I get from those mini conferences again to just readjust my small group instruction. And then also a lot of time I do take a look at those questions as the students are answering them, especially if they're open-ended, and I'll go over it whole group as well. So I kind of do it in all three different ways, conferencing with students, one-to-one, small group, and then even whole group. We'll kind of go over and see what other students were thinking. So hopefully that answered your question.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation and I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Do you know if we need to return to the main meeting?
That I do not know.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Ms. Harmon. Thank you so much.
Thank
Now
you.
I'll be sticking around for a little bit, for a little while. It is now 11:51 and we are done for the day.